In 1939, a man walked into the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan and had papers thrown in his face. He was given 1 week to surrender half of everything he owned, or die. His enemy controlled more money than some European nations and had never lost a single battle in 40 years of organized crime. What happened next was described by those who witnessed it as the chess equivalent of Bobby Fischer destroying Soviet grandmasters, a masterpiece of strategy so brutal, so elegant, so utterly devastating that the victim destroyed his own empire without ever understanding he was being played. It was Wednesday, the 14th of June, 1939, approximately 11:17 in the morning. Benjamin Bugsy Siegel stood by the window, flooded with June sunlight, holding an envelope made of thick brown paper with no return address, no stamp, no identifying marks, only the name Mr. Lansky written in flawless calligraphy. If you want to find out how this incredible story ends, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell so you never miss our next videos. Siegel tore the envelope open. Something fell onto the polished mahogany surface, small, round, metallic, a coin. It struck the wood and began spinning, producing a quiet ringing sound that seemed to fill the entire room. They both watched it rotate, slower, slower, slower still, until it finally fell flat with one last muffled clink. 1 cent, a dirty, green-tarnished penny from 1919. Lincoln's profile barely visible beneath layers of patina and street grime, as if someone had fished it from a gutter. Siegel reached into the envelope and extracted a folded sheet of paper, unfolded it, read it, and his face changed, first confusion, then understanding, then something resembling horror. "Meyer," he said quietly, "you better look at this yourself." Meyer Lansky took the paper. 4 words written in flawless calligraphy, "Your share, Meyer." 3 seconds. 3 seconds of absolute silence during which Meyer Lansky, the man who controlled more money than some European nations, the man before whom 5 New York crime families bowed, the man whose name silenced rooms full of America's most dangerous men, stared at a dirty penny and 4 words on a piece of paper. Then the water glass on the edge of the desk flew into the wall and shattered into 1,000 pieces. "Find me this black man!" Lansky's voice cracked into a scream, and Siegel, who had seen his friend in every possible situation, heard something he had never heard before: panic. "Find him and bring him here alive. I want to look into his eyes when I explain what it means to insult Meyer Lansky." Glass shards glittered on the parquet floor. Water drops ran down the silk wallpaper, leaving dark streaks, and on the mahogany desk, flooded with June sunlight, lay a dirty penny, the smallest monetary unit in the United States of America, 1 cent. Smaller than that is only 0. But to understand why 4 words on a scrap of paper made the most cold-blooded man in organized crime lose control, we need to go back 6 weeks, to the man who wrote that note and to what made him who he was. Harlem, New York, late April 1939. The corner of 137th Street and Lenox Avenue smelled of fried fish from Sylvia's Diner, cheap tobacco, and that peculiar scent that exists only in Harlem after rain. 3 o'clock in the morning. The streets were empty. Maisie's barber shop had officially closed at 8 in the evening. The sign was dark, blinds drawn, doors secured with 3 locks. But in the back room a light burned, a dim lamp with a green shade illuminating a table covered with papers and the man studying them. Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, Bumpy to everyone who knew him, sat in a leather chair holding a book that had cost him 75 cents in a second-hand shop on 4th Avenue. The Prince, by Niccolo Machiavelli. He had read it 34 times during 4 years in Sing Sing prison, and each time he found something new. Men avenge slight injuries, he read aloud, but not grave ones. Therefore the injury done to a man should be such that there is no fear of revenge. He closed the book and looked at the wall. Where there had once hung a painting of the Carolina countryside where he had been born, now there was paper, sheets and sheets of paper covering every inch from floor to ceiling. Names written in black ink, photographs cut from newspapers, red thread connecting one point to another, creating a web so intricate it looked like the work of a madman. But there was nothing mad about it. This was a map of Meyer Lansky's empire in New York. Every person, every money flow, every connection, every weakness. You see, Bumpy Johnson was not what he appeared to be. The federal prison psychiatrist had recorded his IQ at 274, with a note that said, "Retest, possible measurement error." During 4 years in Sing Sing, he had read 2,300 books. Philosophy, history, economics, psychology, languages. He spoke French, Spanish, Italian, and could read ancient Greek. He played chess with Columbia University professors during visiting hours and never lost a single game. But the world saw only what it expected to see. A colored gangster from a colored neighborhood, a street thug who had gotten lucky, a problem to be solved. That was the mistake that would cost Meyer Lansky everything. 6 months ago, Bumpy had learned from his man at the docks that Lansky had started taking interest in Harlem. This was inevitable. Harlem brought in $2,300,000 yearly from lottery, gambling, loan sharking, and protection. Money that never passed through Italian hands. For Lansky, a man who saw numbers where others saw people, this was an open wound, dripping profit. The question was not whether Lansky would come for Harlem. The question was when. And Bumpy had been preparing ever since. "You know what separates a smart man from a stupid one?" he said to the darkness. "A stupid man sees the chessboard. A smart man sees the player opposite. But a genius sees what that player thinks about when he goes to sleep." Lansky was sending his man next week with an ultimatum, 50% or death. He didn't know Bumpy had been waiting for exactly this moment for 6 months, and the trap was already set. Havana, Cuba, the Hotel Nacional, a white palace overlooking the Malecon. April 1939. Meyer Lansky stood at the window of his corner suite, holding a leather folder containing financial reports from the eastern seaboard. His eyes were fixed on a single line, underlined 3 times in red pencil. Harlem, estimated annual revenue, $2,300,000. Control, Johnson, Ellsworth, Bumpy. Organization share, 0. 0. The words sat on the page like a slap across the face. 50%, Lansky said, without turning from the window. His voice was soft, almost gentle, the voice of a man discussing weather. But Benny Siegel, lounging on a white leather sofa, recognized that tone. It was the voice Lansky used before people disappeared. 50% of everything, non-negotiable, and if he refuses, Harlem gets a new manager. What Lansky did not know, what he could not possibly have known, was that the man he dismissed as a colored street thug had already predicted this exact conversation, had already mapped out every possible response, had already set in motion a plan so intricate that Lansky would spend 6 weeks destroying his own empire without ever understanding what was happening. The message went out that week. Sammy Kowalski would deliver the ultimatum. The meeting was set for the 2nd of May, and the countdown to Meyer Lansky's greatest humiliation officially began. Manhattan, the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, the Bull and Bear Restaurant, Tuesday, the 2nd of May, 1939, 8 o'clock in the evening. Crystal chandeliers cast pools of warm light across white tablecloths. The murmur of wealthy conversation filled the air. Bankers discussing mergers, politicians negotiating favors, society wives comparing summer homes. Bumpy Johnson entered wearing a charcoal gray suit from a Savile Row tailor, white shirt with French cuffs, shoes polished until they reflected the chandelier light like black mirrors. Every eye in the restaurant tracked him, a colored man dressed like a Wall Street banker, walking with the unhurried confidence of someone who owned the building. At 8:14, Sammy the Fish Kowalski walked through the door, thick neck, broken nose, hands like slabs of meat. He spotted Bumpy immediately, walked to the table, pulled out a chair without being invited, and sat down heavily enough to make the silverware rattle. Then he reached into his jacket, produced a leather folder, and threw it across the table. Papers spilled out. Several sheets slid off the edge and fluttered to the floor. 23 diners at nearby tables stopped their conversations. They were watching now, forks suspended halfway to mouths. 50%, Kowalski said, loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. Everything you make in Harlem, this is not a negotiation. This is a notification. He leaned forward. His breath smelled of garlic and cheap wine. You have 1 week to agree. After that, Harlem gets a new manager, and you get a plot in Woodlawn Cemetery. He smiled, a cruel, ugly smile. They have a special section for your kind. Ever wonder what it feels like to be publicly humiliated by someone who considers you less than human? To have your life's work dismissed as a rounding error? To be spoken to like a servant who has forgotten his place? Bumpy Johnson was experiencing all of this, and he was smiling. He looked at the papers on the floor, at Kowalski, at the faces of the white diners watching this drama unfold. A woman at the next table had her hand pressed to her mouth. A banker 3 tables away was already composing the story he would tell at his club tomorrow. Then Bumpy picked up his bourbon, took a slow sip, and set the glass down with a soft click. Please tell Mr. Lansky that I will consider his proposal carefully, he said. His voice was calm, measured, almost warm. 1 week? That should be sufficient. Kowalski blinked. He had expected rage, threats, perhaps violence. He had not expected this quiet acceptance. Smart choice, he grunted, standing. 1 week, not a day more. He walked out without looking back, without noticing that Bumpy's right hand, hidden beneath the table throughout the entire conversation, had been writing in a small leather notebook. Names, dates, connections, the first moves of a game that Kowalski and his master in Havana did not even know had begun. Kowalski left believing he had broken a man. He would report to Lansky that the job was done, that Johnson looked like a beaten dog. He didn't notice Bumpy's hand under the table, writing names in a notebook. The first moves of a game Kowalski didn't know existed. That night, Bumpy did not sleep. He stood before the wall of his apartment, covered with photographs and red thread, and he searched for the one thing that would bring Meyer Lansky's empire crashing down. Not money. Lansky had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. Not power. Lansky's power came from his usefulness to others. Attack it directly, and those allies would rally to defend him. Not reputation. Close, but not quite. And then, at 3:47 in the morning, he found it. Trust. Lansky's empire did not run on money or power. It ran on trust. 5 families trusted him with their finances. Partners trusted him to keep his word. Politicians and police trusted him to maintain order. Remove that trust. Make Lansky doubt his own people. And the machine would begin to destroy itself. The hardest move in chess, Bumpy said aloud, is not your move. It's making your opponent make your move for you. The plan had 7 stages, 7 invisible strikes that would look like accidents, coincidences, bad luck, and by the end, Lansky would destroy everything he had built in Harlem with his own hands, without ever knowing who was pulling the strings. What happens when 19 ordinary people become invisible soldiers in a war they don't know they're fighting? The Eternal Rest Funeral Home on 138th Street. Thursday, the 4th of May, 1939, 11 o'clock at night. The front room smelled of formaldehyde and lilies, but in the back room, behind a door marked Private, the smell was different. Cigar smoke, coffee, tension. Bumpy sat at the head of a long table, surrounded by 19 sealed envelopes. Each one contained $50 and a single sheet of paper with specific instructions. A typesetter in Brooklyn, a porter at the Waldorf Astoria, a waiter at an Italian restaurant on Mulberry Street, a stenographer in Lansky's lawyer's office, a maid at a house in New Jersey. None of them would ever meet. Each thought they were doing a small favor for good money. Each would provide a single piece of information, a guest list here, a document there, a conversation overheard. 19 pairs of eyes, 19 pairs of ears, and not one of them knew about the others. I don't ask you to risk anything, Bumpy had told each of them, one by one, in separate meetings across 3 weeks. I ask you to see, and tell me what you see, that's all. The stenographer was the most valuable. Her name was Dorothy, she was 23 years old, and she worked for Samuel Rothberg, the lawyer who handled Lansky's legitimate business fronts. Every document that passed through that office she could access. Every meeting that took place she could report. She didn't know she was part of an army. She thought she was earning extra money to help her sick mother, and in a way she was. Bumpy always paid more than he promised. By Sunday, the network was in place. 19 invisible threads, each one connected to a different part of Lansky's empire. And now it was time to pull them. Day 1. The first envelope arrived. Monday, the 8th of May, 1939. 9:14 in the morning, the office of Jacob Shapiro on West 47th Street smelled of old paper and cigar ash. Shapiro sat behind his desk, a massive oak monstrosity inherited from his father, and stared at the envelope that had been waiting on his doorstep. No return address, no postmark, just his name, typed on a plain white label. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a photocopy of a document he recognized immediately, his own handwriting, account numbers from a bank in Zurich, figures with 6 zeros, dates going back 3 years, his private account, the one where he had been carefully, methodically, invisibly skimming 2% of everything that passed through his hands. A handwritten note was clipped to the photocopy. Interesting reading. I wonder what Meyer would think. Shapiro's face went gray. His heart hammered against his ribs. He read the note 3 times, as if repetition might change the words. Who sent this? How did they know? Who else has seen it? His first instinct was to call Lansky, confess everything. But confession meant death. Lansky did not forgive. Lansky did not forget. Lansky simply eliminated problems and moved on. So Shapiro did what frightened men do. He said nothing. He hid the envelope in his desk drawer. He tried to pretend everything was normal, but the fear was planted, and fear, like a seed, only grows. Day 5. The raid. Friday, the 12th of May, 6:22 in the morning. The Bronx, a warehouse on East 141st Street. Detective Michael O'Brien of the 6th Precinct stood in the doorway, watching his men carry out crate after crate of contraband. 83 crates, $80,000 worth of merchandise. O'Brien had received an anonymous tip 3 days earlier, a woman's voice giving an address and a suggestion that interesting things might be found there. The address was too specific, the timing too convenient. But when he drove past the warehouse and saw professional guards, he knew the tip was real. Someone was going to be very unhappy about this. O'Brien took money from Lansky, $500 a month to look the other way. He also took money from the Lucchese family, $300 a month for information about Lansky. It was a dangerous game, playing both sides, but he had done it for years without incident. Now, someone had handed him this warehouse on a silver platter. Why? Who benefited? He didn't know, and that uncertainty gnawed at him all day. By midnight, Lansky had heard the news. By the following morning, he was asking questions. Day 9. The suspicion spreads. Wednesday, the 17th of May. Sammy Kowalski sat in an Italian restaurant on Mulberry Street, meeting with one of Lansky's suppliers. Halfway through the meal, he noticed a familiar face at a nearby table, someone he had seen before, someone who should not have been there. He couldn't place where he knew the face, but the coincidence bothered him. After the meeting, he reported to Lansky, possible surveillance, possible leak. Lansky listened, said nothing, made a note. The paranoia was beginning to take root. Day 14. The poison reaches Siegel, Monday, the 22nd of May. Benny Siegel received an anonymous letter at his hotel. Inside was a single typed paragraph suggesting that Jacob Shapiro was keeping secret accounts in Zurich, that he had been skimming for years, that proof could be obtained if someone cared to look. Siegel read it twice. Then he burned it. But he didn't forget. And when he next saw Shapiro, he found himself watching more carefully, noticing things he had never noticed before, the expensive watch, the new car, the way Shapiro avoided certain topics. Was it evidence of guilt, or was Siegel seeing what he wanted to see? It didn't matter. The suspicion was there now, and suspicion, once planted, is almost impossible to remove. Day 18. The disappearances begin. Friday, the 26th of May. 2 delivery trucks carrying merchandise for Lansky's network failed to arrive at their destinations. The drivers claimed they had been stopped by police, their cargo confiscated. But when Lansky's people checked with their contacts in the department, no one knew anything about any stops, no records, no confiscations, no explanation. The trucks had simply vanished, along with $30,000 worth of goods. That night, in a safe house in Murray Hill, Meyer Lansky sat in a wingback chair that cost more than most families earned in a year. His eyes were bloodshot. His suit was wrinkled. He had not slept more than 4 hours in 5 days. 3 weeks, he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. Something goes wrong every single day. Raids, missing shipments, surveillance. This is not coincidence, Benny. Someone is playing a game against us. Find out who. Siegel nodded, but where would he even begin? The attacks came from everywhere and nowhere. Each incident seemed unconnected to the others. A tip here, a leak there, a truck that disappeared, a meeting that was observed. There was no pattern, no signature, no way to trace any of it back to a single source. Because there was no single source, there were 19 sources, each one providing a tiny piece of a puzzle they couldn't see. And at the center of that puzzle sat a man in a barber shop in Harlem, reading Machiavelli by lamplight, waiting for his enemy to make the next move. Every leak was planned. Every anonymous letter came from the same hand, and the next move would be the cruelest of all. Lansky would eliminate 2 of his own men, innocent men who had served him loyally for 15 years, because the evidence would point directly at them, and Bumpy Johnson would not have to lift a finger. New Jersey, a lake house on the shores of Lake Hopatcong. Saturday, the 27th of May, 1939, 6:14 in the morning. The sun was just beginning to rise over the water, painting the surface gold and orange. Tony Benedetto had been with the organization for 17 years. He had started as a driver, worked his way up through the ranks. He had a wife named Maria, 3 children under 10, a house in Newark almost paid off. He had never stolen a cent, never talked to police, never given Meyer Lansky a single reason to doubt him. Marco Gallo had been with the organization for 15 years. He handled logistics in Harlem, shipments, schedules, coordination. He knew every address, every route, every safe house. He was efficient and invisible. He had a gambling problem, but he always paid his debts. Both men were completely loyal, and both men were now lying at the bottom of Lake Hopatcong. All the evidence pointed to them. The warehouse raid, Benedetto knew the address. The missing trucks, Gallo coordinated the routes. The surveillance reports, both men had access to the meeting schedules. Even a forged note in handwriting that looked enough like Gallo's to pass a casual inspection. Lansky examined the evidence, applied his formidable intelligence, and reached the only logical conclusion. He was wrong, but how could he know? The evidence was real, the timing matched, the access was undeniable. Every analysis led to the same answer. So, he gave the order, and Benny Siegel made the arrangements. A boat, 2 trusted men, a quiet spot on the lake where the water was deep. You want to know the cruelest part of this story? Bumpy Johnson did not kill those men. He did not order their deaths. He did not even know their names until he read about their disappearance in the newspaper 3 days later. All he did was arrange for information to reach Meyer Lansky, true information, verifiable information, in a way that made Lansky draw his own conclusions. The warehouse address was real. Shapiro's secret account was real. O'Brien's double-dealing was real. Every piece of evidence was true. But true information, arranged in a certain way, can create a lie more convincing than any fiction. And so 2 innocent men died because a genius made a reasonable decision based on information that had been deliberately arranged to produce exactly that outcome. This is what it means to win without fighting, to destroy an empire by making its emperor destroy it himself. In Harlem, word spread through the Whisper Network. Lansky had eliminated his own men. Lansky was seeing traitors everywhere. Lansky was losing control. The remaining members of his network in Harlem, collectors, drivers, fixers, began asking uncomfortable questions. If Benedetto and Gallo could be eliminated based on suspicion alone, who was next? Within a week, 2 collectors fled to Chicago. A driver stopped showing up for work. The 20-year fixer packed his bags and caught a train to California. Lansky's operation in Harlem did not collapse dramatically. It simply evaporated, like morning mist burning off under the summer sun. One day there was a network. The next day there was nothing, and Bumpy Johnson sat in his leather chair, reading The Prince, waiting for the perfect moment to deliver his final message. The hardest move in chess is not your move. It's making your opponent make your move for you. 2 innocent men at the bottom of a lake, a network that evaporated overnight, and Bumpy hadn't lifted a finger. Now there was only one thing left to do: send the message. Harlem, Maisie's barber shop on the corner of 137th Street and Lenox Avenue. Tuesday, the 13th of June, 1939, 10:17 in the evening. The shop had been closed for hours. The chairs were empty, the mirrors dark, the smell of hair tonic fading into the night air. But in the back room, a single lamp burned, casting its green-tinged light over a man sitting alone at a table. Bumpy Johnson held a coin in his fingers, a dirty, corroded penny from 1919, the year he had arrived in New York from Charleston, South Carolina. The year Meyer Lansky had started his first racket on the Lower East Side, the year everything had begun for both of them. He turned the coin over and over, feeling the ridges worn smooth by time, Lincoln's portrait barely visible beneath decades of grime. He had found this particular penny in a gutter on Lenox Avenue 3 days ago, had bent down and picked it up on impulse, had kept it in his pocket ever since. Now he knew exactly what to do with it. On the table before him lay a single sheet of cream-colored paper, the kind used by lawyers and bankers, the kind that conveyed importance. Beside it sat a fountain pen filled with black ink. Bumpy set down the penny and picked up the pen. He wrote, slowly, carefully. In the calligraphic script he had learned in Sing Sing, copying medieval manuscripts during endless hours in the prison library. Each letter was perfect, elegant, precise, almost beautiful in its simplicity. 4 words. That was all he needed. Your share, Meyer. He set down the pen and examined his work. No threats, no explanations, no demands, just 4 words that would tell Meyer Lansky exactly what had happened and exactly what it meant. Do you understand what this message truly says? On the surface, it is an insult, a declaration that Lansky's share of Harlem is 1 cent, the smallest possible denomination, barely worth bending down to pick up. But beneath that surface lies something far more devastating. It says, I know what you did. I know about Benedetto and Gallo. I know about your paranoia and your collapsing network. I know everything. It says this was not luck. This was not coincidence. This was me. I did this. I made you destroy yourself. It says, you thought you were the smartest man in the room. You were wrong. Bumpy folded the paper once, twice, creasing it with his thumbnail until the edges were sharp and clean. He placed it in an envelope, plain brown, no return address, and dropped the penny inside. The metal clinked against the paper, a small sound, the same sound that would echo through the halls of organized crime history for decades to come. He sealed the envelope and wrote a name on the front in that same perfect script. Mr. Lansky. Tomorrow, a shoeshine boy at the Waldorf Astoria would receive $5 and simple instructions. Deliver this envelope to a man named Benny Siegel. Say it is from a friend in Harlem. Do not wait for a reply. And then the game would be over. Bumpy leaned back in his chair and lit a cigarette. The smoke curled upward, blue-gray in the lamplight, rising toward the ceiling where it would dissipate and disappear, like Lansky's dreams of Harlem, like the lives of Benedetto and Gallo, like the illusion that Meyer Lansky was invincible. You know why I chose a penny, he said aloud, to no one. Because a penny is the smallest thing that exists in American money. Smaller than that is only 0. And that's exactly what Meyer Lansky will get from Harlem. Today, tomorrow, forever. 6 weeks ago, Sammy Kowalski had thrown papers in his face, had called him names, had given him 1 week to surrender half of everything he owned, had threatened him with death. Bumpy had smiled then. He was smiling now, not because he was happy. Happiness was not an emotion he associated with this business, but because the game had played out exactly as he had foreseen. Every move, every reaction, every domino falling precisely where he calculated it would fall. Tomorrow morning, Meyer Lansky would open this envelope. He would read the 4 words. He would understand, perhaps not immediately, but eventually, exactly what had happened. And for the first time in 43 years, he wouldn't know what to do. Wednesday, the 14th of June, 1939, 11:17 in the morning. The envelope arrived. The penny fell onto the polished mahogany desk and spun, producing that quiet metallic ring, the same sound it had made when Bumpy dropped it into the envelope now completing its journey across Manhattan. Lansky read the 4 words, and the water glass flew into the wall. But rage was only the first reaction. After the shouting, after the broken glass was swept away, after Siegel was dispatched to find this black man, after all of that, Meyer Lansky sat alone in his suite and thought. He was a genius. Everyone said so. He had built an empire through intelligence, patience, and an almost supernatural ability to see patterns where others saw chaos. Now, finally, he began to see the pattern. The anonymous letters, the warehouse raid, the surveillance reports, the missing trucks, the evidence against Benedetto and Gallo, evidence that had seemed so convincing, so logical, so undeniable, all of it orchestrated, all of it designed to make him see exactly what someone wanted him to see. And he had fallen for it, completely, absolutely, like an amateur walking into the oldest trap in the book. 2 of his best men were dead. His network in Harlem had evaporated. His own paranoia had done more damage than any army could have inflicted, and the man responsible had never fired a shot, never lifted a finger, never done anything that could be traced, proven, or punished. He had simply provided information, true information, and let Meyer Lansky destroy himself. For 3 days, Lansky considered his options. He could retaliate, send men to Harlem with guns and orders to make an example. But his network was gone, his best people were dead or scattered, and any direct attack would confirm what the entire underworld was already whispering, that Meyer Lansky had been outmaneuvered by a colored man from Harlem. The humiliation would follow him forever, or he could accept defeat, walk away, acknowledge that Harlem belonged to Bumpy Johnson and always would, swallow his pride and move on to other territories, other ventures, other games where the odds were more in his favor. On the 3rd day, he made a phone call. Central Park, the Bethesda Fountain, Friday, the 23rd of June, 1939, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The angel with outstretched wings reflected in the water below, surrounded by tourists and lovers and children chasing pigeons. 2 men sat on a bench, 3 feet apart. No bodyguards, no weapons, just 2 players who had finished their game. Meyer Lansky spoke first. "You eliminated 2 of my best men." His voice was quiet, controlled, but beneath the control there was something else, something that might have been respect. "Without touching them." "How?" Bumpy said nothing. "I spent 3 weeks trying to find the traitors in my organization, and it was you. The whole time, it was you." Silence. The warehouse, the letters, the evidence against Benedetto and Gallo. Lansky shook his head slowly. "Everything was true. That's what I can't understand. Everything you gave me was true." "True information," Bumpy said finally, "arranged in a certain way, tells whatever story you want it to tell." Lansky absorbed this, nodded once. 40 years in this business," he said. "I've outmaneuvered Lucky Luciano. I've outmaneuvered 5 families. I've outmaneuvered the federal government. And I was outplayed by a man I never even considered a player." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the penny, held it up to the afternoon light, Lincoln's profile barely visible beneath the grime. "Harlem is yours," he said. "I won't come back." Bumpy stood. The conversation was over. He had won, and there was nothing more to say. But after 3 steps, he paused, turned back. "Mr. Lansky." The older man looked up. "That penny, keep it." Bumpy's voice was calm, almost gentle. A reminder that sometimes the strongest man is not the one with the biggest army. Sometimes it's the one everyone underestimated. He walked away without waiting for a response, past the fountain with its angel, past the tourists and lovers and children, into the June afternoon, where the trees were green and the sky was blue and Harlem was waiting for him. Behind him, Meyer Lansky sat alone on the bench, turning a dirty penny over and over in his fingers. The game was over, and the legend was just beginning. Harlem, 1968, 29 years later. The corner of 125th Street and Lenox Avenue looked different now. The old barber shops had new signs. The jazz clubs had become soul music venues. The faces on the street were younger, angrier, dreaming different dreams. But some things never changed. On a summer evening, when the heat rose from the pavement in visible waves and the smell of fried chicken drifted from every other doorway, a group of old men gathered on folding chairs outside a grocery store. They did this every evening, these men who remembered the old days, who had seen things, who knew stories that would never appear in any history book. A young man walked past, barely 20, wearing the bright colors and confident stride of a new generation. He nodded respectfully to the elders. In Harlem, you always showed respect to the old men. You never knew what they had done, what they had seen, who they had known. One of the elders called out to him, "Young blood, come here, sit down. Let me tell you a story." The young man hesitated. He had places to be, people to see. But something in the old man's voice made him stop, made him pull up an empty crate and sit. "You know who Bumpy Johnson was?" The young man shrugged. He had heard the name, some old gangster from back in the day, before his time. "Let me tell you what Bumpy Johnson did," the old man said. "Back in '39, there was a man named Meyer Lansky. You probably never heard of him either. He was the money man for the whole Italian mob, ran everything from Cuba to Canada. More money than God, more power than the mayor." The other old men nodded. They remembered. Lansky decided he wanted Harlem, sent his people up here with guns and threats, told Bumpy he had 1 week to hand over half of everything or end up in a cemetery. The young man leaned forward slightly. This was more interesting than he had expected. Now, most people would have fought, or run, or given in. But Bumpy was different. Bumpy read books, philosophy, history, strategy. He played chess with college professors and never lost. They tested his brain in prison, said his IQ was so high the test couldn't measure it properly. So what did he do? The old man smiled, a slow smile, full of memory and satisfaction. He didn't fight. He didn't run. He didn't give in. He played a game that Lansky didn't even know was being played. Made Lansky think his own people were betraying him. Made Lansky destroy his own network with his own hands. Made the smartest man in organized crime look like a fool. How? Information, young blood. True information, put in the right places at the right times. Lansky got so paranoid he killed 2 of his own best men, innocent men. After that, everyone who worked for him in Harlem ran away. The whole thing collapsed in 3 weeks. The young man was fully engaged now. And then Bumpy sent him a message, 1 dirty penny and 4 words, "Your share, Meyer." The old men laughed. Even after 29 years, the joke still landed. Lansky came to Harlem himself after that, met Bumpy in Central Park. 2 men on a bench, no guns, no bodyguards. And you know what Lansky said? The young man shook his head. He said, 40 years in this business, and I was outplayed by a man I never considered a player." The old man leaned back in his chair. The evening light was fading now, street lights beginning to flicker on. "That's the story, young blood. The man who beat the mob without firing a shot. The penny that was worth more than $1 million. The day Harlem stopped belonging to anyone except Harlem." The young man sat in silence for a moment, processing what he had heard. "What happened to the penny?" he asked finally. "Lansky kept it. All his life he kept it. They say when he died down in Miami years later, they found it in his desk drawer. Still dirty, still worthless, still the most expensive penny in American history. The young man stood. He had heard enough, had learned something he would carry with him, would maybe tell his own children someday, if he lived long enough to have them. "Thank you," he said. "Remember it," the old man replied. "Remember that the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun. It's the mind of a man everyone underestimated. Remember that Harlem takes care of its own, always has, always will." The young man walked away into the Harlem night. Behind him, the old men resumed their conversation, their memories, their folding chair vigil over a neighborhood that had survived everything the world had thrown at it. And somewhere in Miami, in a drawer in a house that had belonged to a man who controlled millions, a dirty penny from 1919 sat in the darkness. Lincoln's face, worn almost smooth, a reminder of the day Meyer Lansky learned a lesson he never forgot. Some battles are not won with armies. Some wars are not won with bullets. Some victories belong to the man who waits, who watches, who thinks 20 moves ahead while his enemies are still setting up the board. Bumpy Johnson died in 1968, the same year those old men sat on their folding chairs telling his story. He collapsed in a restaurant on 125th Street, surrounded by friends, having outlived most of his enemies. They say half of Harlem came to his funeral. They say men who had fought him for decades stood in the rain to pay respects. They say the story of the penny was told and retold that day, passed from mouth to mouth, growing with each telling until it became something more than history. It became legend, and legends never die. Harlem belonged to Harlem, and it always would.